My name's Todd Ogasawara. You can see my alphabet soup up there. And what I'm going to talk about today is a high-level view of open source in Hawaii state government. If you want to know more nitty-gritty, you can talk to me or talk to my development partner, John Lim, over there, and we can try to explain it to you. Is there anybody here not from this state, by the way? Oh, okay. Okay, so that's the civic area of our little town. To the left, that big building surrounded by the moat is our state capitol. My office is a smaller building sort of to the rear of it. The Iolani Palace kind of down in the middle. If you haven't been walking around town, you might want to take a time to do that. It's actually quite a nice place to walk around. In any case, so today I'm going to try to tell you our story in the form of a linear story. What I want to do is take you through a timeline of what we've done, why we've done it, and I want to start that story by telling you who we are, because I think that's an important part of how we came to use open source in the state of Hawaii government. The WHO is a government team. The team consists of two of us, so we're more like a beach volleyball team than anything else. And the other half of the team is right there, John Lim. He likes to say the prettier half usually, but you know. We started in October 2001. We came from outside of the state, so we came into state government with pretty much the knowledge most citizens do when they come to work state government, which means we didn't understand a darn thing. And we spent the last 3.5 years or so learning a lot more than we thought we would. And what we do is, we don't like to say what we do because, one of the branch chiefs is sitting there, and I really don't want him to know what I do. But but what we do, when nobody's looking, is we're supposed to be doing research and delivery of new information technology systems. We have a pretty simple philosophy. We're very pragmatic. We came to open source not because of philosophical reasons, in terms of when you listen to someone like Richard Stallman, for example, free as in freedom, that kind of thing. We just needed a solution. We try to be very inclusive. So again, unlike some people, we don't have a philosophy of open source or nothing. We use open source where it makes sense. We use proprietary software where it makes sense. We use them together when it makes sense, and that's often the case. And in fact, to prove that point today, I'm using a Windows 2000, an old Windows 2000 notebook, I might add. I have to dust it off. But it's running OpenOffice 2.0 beta, which we'll get into that later. Also, we believe in best-of-breed tools, which may seem obvious, but it's not always. You know, if you visit freshmeat.net or SourceForge, there's always cool stuff up here, and you go, oh wow, that would really make a lot of sense to use. Then you find out, well, it's just one guy doing it somewhere off in his basement or his attic, and you wonder, gee, what if he gets hit by a car? And yeah, the source code is open, but do you really want to dig into it? So by best of breed, we really look at software that is well supported by a thriving community, and that kind of software includes Apache, HTTP, and PHP and Python, where, even if Rasmus or somebody like that gets run over by a car, the project continues. That's what we're looking for. And finally, it's not just about the code. It's also about sharing information as well as the bits in the computer or the typed pages of the code. It doesn't make sense to just use open source because it's there, because it's open. We use it because we can transmit that information to other people. I think one of the things you need to know about us, my partner John Lim and me, is that although we are employees of the state, in other words, we get vacation time, we're in the retirement system, we get sick leave and all of that, we are not civil servants. We are on a year-to-year contract. And so we've been like that since day one. And so our goal and our mission is always to be able to transmit our information, to transfer the knowledge we have to somebody else, because we're not going to operate what we build. And so we can't operate with the mentality that, well, we know what it is, so that's good enough. Just having open code isn't enough. You have to be open in how you're using it, and that's one of our philosophies. So the overview that I'm going to give today is basically in 4 parts. And the first part is really the most important, because the rest of it is kind of like, well, you'll say, well, sure, I would have done the same thing. At least I think you'll say that. One of the most important things to remember about the state, or to know about the state government if you don't know it, and that we didn't know when we got there, was that each department has its own IT group. So there isn't a czar. There isn't a person that says, everything will be this way. You will do this. You will use this. This is the way it's going to happen. You may be familiar with the different branches of the government: the judiciary, the courts, the executive branch that falls under the governor, and the legislative branch. But what you may not know is that within the executive branch, the governor's branch, which is the largest in the state, there are many departments. I think there's like 19 departments. And for the most part, each of those departments has their own IT group with their own management system, their own funding, and their own mission. So software applications and software development tool choices are driven by lots of factors, right? It's not top-down in the sense that top-down always is bottom. There's different tops and different bottoms. Different departments have different driving factors. So you may say, well, why are you're using PHP and they're not? Or that you're using PHP and they're using ASP. And that may be because, the different choices are made for different reasons. Many departments, for example, that are tied to federal funding have very specific requirements that, they have to follow by law, right? And, if you've worked in a private enterprise, you often hear the phrase, well, who made that a law? Well, in our case, somebody actually did make it a law. And they have to follow certain rules that maybe doesn't make it plausible to do certain things. And finally, we have a fee-based side. You may not know this, that when you go to Hawaii.gov, for example, you see an image, you see some words, you click here, you go to different places, including Gov's page. Hawaii.gov is actually two different universes. One universe is controlled by a consortium called NIC, actually. It has a group here called HIC, Hawaii Information Consortium, that develops the fee-based side of Hawaii.gov. So, for example, if you get a fishing license or something we have to pay the government, that's developed by HIC. And they take a portion of that fee to generate their income, their profit. If you go to some of the more informational sites where there's no fee involved, for example, if you go to the Department of Health looking for vaccination information, or you go to the governor's page, Lieutenant Governor's page, that part is most likely developed by somebody that's a civil servant, a person that's a government employee, not by this consortium, HIC. As I said earlier, we are about integration. We're about proprietary and open source products. We're not trying to force everybody to move to Linux. We're not trying to force everybody to move off of IIS and into Apache HTTPD. So we're not an exclusive or. It's not that you can't run Windows or this or that. And of course, we like to point out to people that you guys probably all know this, but there are many open source products that have been ported to Microsoft Windows. In fact, this little notebook that I kind of use as my test bed is, as I said, an old Windows 2000 notebook. It's a 700 megahertz Pentium 3, 256 megs of RAM, really tiny by today's standards. So it runs Microsoft Windows 2000, but practically everything else on it is open source. It runs, OpenOffice.org and Firefox and Thunderbird and all that other kind of good stuff. Most of our work has been server-based, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here. And that's where we get the most bang for the buck. You develop one thing on a server and thousands of people can use it. We haven't really tried to do a desktop deployment. We definitely have not tried to, for example, convert people from Microsoft Windows XP to some distro of Linux. Some people have chosen to do that on an individual basis, and that's okay if they can support it. We also have, as I said, open source applications running on top of Windows, so you don't have to change the entire platform, but you can choose to use things like Firefox and so forth. If you had asked us a year or two ago, we probably would have told you that open source use in the government, in the state of Hawaii government, was in an exploratory stage. And sometimes you may still hear us slip and say that. But really, after 3 years, we've gone way past that, and we're now, into deployment by several years. We've had products running internally and externally for a couple of years now, fairly successfully, I think, and invisibly for the most part. You really shouldn't notice that whether it's open source or proprietary. But just because it's deployed doesn't mean you should consider it mainstream. For example, while we've developed a number of new products using open source technology, we haven't done a lot of conversion. And in fact, thinking back, I think there's only one project we had where we actually converted an existing product into an open source one. In fact, John was the project lead for that. And that was only because it was running on a computer so old that it wasn't made anymore. There weren't any parts to repair it. And so that it had to be moved, else the whole thing would die. So, you're not going to see us, for example, try to redo the financial system or something like that in open source, at least at this point. However, it is a choice, and especially for new projects, we definitely bring it up when we hear about a new project coming up, especially if we've got a money crunch, as you might imagine. And so for us, having open source and proprietary solutions available provides a lot of flexibility for us. It allows us to have a choice of which way to go. There are times when a proprietary product makes sense. And in fact, just the other day, John and I were talking about, doing some things with our Windows 2003, I guess Microsoft reversed it, Windows Server 2003, because we're kind of interested in looking at SharePoint Portal again, and some of the Exchange Server features. So it's not something that we rule out just because it's proprietary. So now that that's an overview, you kind of have a feel of how state government is structured, and probably a little bit different from what you may have thought. And this is how we got started. So John and I were brought in October of 2001. As I said, from outside of the state government. We lived here all that time previous to that, of course. And we were in our discussions for our positions starting the summer of 2001. Our backgrounds was mostly Microsoft Windows. In fact, John, did you finish your MSCE or were you? Yeah, I remember you had passed a bunch of those exams, and so we were pretty heavily into Microsoft Windows platform stuff. I had worked as a contractor for Microsoft for about 6 years. It was pretty much my life. And so when we came in and we were negotiating a project to build a state internet portal, we were going to base it on a Windows 2000 server with running IIS and ASP and pick up Macromedia's Cold Fusion and all that kind of stuff. Run Microsoft SQL Server. That was the game plan. All this discussion took place in August and early September. So as you can imagine, interestingly enough, I had just gotten back from a visit to Microsoft on September 9th, 2001. And you can imagine my surprise that Tuesday morning. Among other things, a couple of days later I thought, boy, I bet that budget we were thinking of is probably not going to be there. We ought to start planning how we're going to do this. And so as soon as we started in October, the first thing we did was look at each other and said, now what? Because we already knew the budget was gone. And so we spent the next couple of months trying to decide what to do and how to do it. And one of the things I mentioned to John was, I said, years ago I used to work with this thing called Linux when it had a kernel that was, I think, released 0.091. And I built a claim system for a large medical company using Perl and GNU-C and that sort of thing. So let's go look at this stuff. I think it's called open source now. And so John and I started taking a look at it, and we said, yeah, we think this is going to work. I had remembered enough of it to kind of get us started and remember how to install Linux and all of that and get us back on track since we couldn't do anything else. We built all our PCs out of spare parts because we literally had nothing to work with. We didn't even have desktop PCs to work to do word processing or email. And so that's how we got started in that month, I guess 2.5 months at the end of 2001. Starting in 2002 then, we developed what we now call our LAMP plus Z toolset, which I think won't surprise anybody. The only part of the LAMP that we don't use is Perl. No particular reason, it's just that it never really played a part in anything we really needed to do. I used to be a Perl geek back in the probably late 80s and early 90s when I was, as I said, writing some stuff to do a claim system. But it looked like Python and PHP did things much cleaner, and plus I could read the code 6 months later. So we started to use that LAMP, and then we discovered Zope early on also. And that got us over a really big hump because Zope let us develop things really quickly. It let us rapid prototype much more quickly than the LAMP toolkit did. And so we headed there, and we called that LAMP plus Z. By the way, because it's such a small group, I do want to be interactive. I should be done pretty shortly, so come down. We can kind of talk stories if you have any more questions. But if you have one in the middle, just yell out. Let me know. So we spent the last couple of years then taking this toolkit, learning it a lot better than I think we thought we would originally. We weren't quite sure we were going to like it. And then we started doing outreach and education within the state government. As you can imagine, we can't do everything with 2 people. And so when I talk about us, I start to talk about us in the sense of my partner John and myself, but really there's a lot of people involved. There are other groups, and in fact one of the things we're proudest of is not something that we did, but we think we influenced, is that one of our mainframe software development groups actually created a open source development sub-team within their larger group. And they've actually delivered some pretty impressive products that we're quite pleased with, and of course we're quite proud of them because they took a language that they're COBOL programmers, mainframe, JCL, TSL, all that stuff. They took a completely unfamiliar environment to them, and with actually very little help from us. I mean, we spent time with them, but in the scheme of things, very little help from us. They bootstrapped themselves and have developed some quite impressive PHP MySQL products, some of which you may notice if you browse through parts of Hawaii.gov. They're pretty hard to find, but they're there. A lot of it is internal, so you won't see it at all, but they're quite important in the scheme of things and how the government works, and we're quite pleased with that. I'm sorry? No, they're not. Although there is Linux running on a mainframe for other things, they're interesting enough. Their products, the mainframe group's products, aren't. They're running on Intel-based systems. On Linux, we're using Red Hat internally right now. And so we now I use larger than John and myself. Several groups now have delivered a number of applications that are running on both the internet and intranet. I would say at the moment there are probably more intranet applications based on open source than internet. So you won't be able to see those unless you come and visit or you work with someone specifically in the state government working on those projects. And the final thing, I guess, that we did in that time frame, aside from the deliverables themselves, was to build what we call virtual labs. And we still aren't complete in its building. But the idea was that we wanted to be able to promote ideas better throughout the state, whether it's open source or proprietary. And so what we did is, because of the nature of the network, we built our own private network within the state government. It's completely separate from the main wide area network, the WAN. And that's so if something happens in our lab, it can't possibly infect or affect the wider network. But what it does is, because it does have a link to the internet, we can give people within the state who may not be directly linked to our WAN, and there are still people like that within state government. People who are not on our WAN but in state government, we can give them access to our servers so they can play with some of the concepts that we've been trying to promote, both proprietary and open source. So we have both Linux and Windows servers on this little virtual lab. I'd also like to note that, like almost everything else we've done, we built this one out of spare parts too. So we went begging to other departments who were going through their 3 or 4 year replacement cycle. We grabbed their old Pentium 2s, Pentium 3s, we salvaged the parts that we could, and we built our little servers out of these things. And it's worked surprisingly well. I think the only thing we bought were the wireless access points, which we're now deploying. So I can't go into what the details of some of the deliverables that are internal for a number of reasons. But we did, as I said, deliver a number of deliverables. We, again, in the larger sense of not just John and myself, but the other groups that are now involved in this. Include the Internet Portal. John was the lead for moving the governor and lieutenant governor's websites from a static HTML design to a dynamic database-driven design. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of PHP MySQL internet projects that have been launched. So this year we're trying to move us yet another step. As I mentioned, we started off really with Zope because it gave us the best bang for our buck in terms of being able to turn around a project quickly. And then we added the rest of the LAMP tools. We purposely avoided Java which of course Java itself is not open source, but it has a lot of open source components available for it. We purposely avoided Java because we felt the ramp-up time to promote it and to make it maintainable on an enterprise basis was just too difficult in a short time frame that we thought we had. We thought we had 12 months basically. But now that we have a stable framework on a LAMP plus Z or LAMPS framework, we are really taking another look at Java. As some of the people who know me in this room know that I'm not a huge Java fan, even though I went to the first Java 1 in San Francisco and that sort of thing. But one of the things I was saying to John over this last summer was, I said, you know, as much as I'm not a Java fan, there seems to be a lot of really smart people who are. And these really smart people seem to be doing some really smart things with it, and things we can't do with our current tool set. And for that reason, we're now adding to our LAMPS the J component, which I guess we'll call LAMPS plus J. And some of the things we're looking at, for example, are Eclipse's Aspect J. And I think I just read a blog on O'ReillyNet yesterday that Aspect J and Aspect Works are merging their projects. So we should see a fairly interesting AOP platform emerging from that merger. We've been looking off and on at some of the Jakarta products available like Tomcat, and also the Jakarta XML products like Access, which allows you to provide web services. And so we're looking at all of those kind of things now to put it together in addition to some of the JBoss projects like JBoss Application Server, JBoss JBPM, their business process management, JBoss's own AOP product, which we're not quite sure how that matches up with Aspect J yet. We need to learn those kind of things. But we're basically looking at a Java middleware framework to add to our architectural tool set. We really don't have that yet. And we think that moving forward, now that sort of the little and medium-sized projects are behind us, or at least in good shape, we want to take a look at some real architectural issues from an enterprise scope. We believe, by the way, that both Zope and PHP and MySQL are truly enterprise ready. So we're not saying they're not enterprise ready, but we don't see the middleware for them that we see available in the Java framework. And that's the reason why we're taking a look at that. For example, I don't think you can find a real mature AOP product for PHP or Python quite yet, whereas the Aspect J, Aspect Works, JPPM all look pretty mature to me. The other thing we want to do is that off and on we've been trying to promote things that you probably say, well, why didn't you do it earlier? Blogs and wikis and RSS. Actually, RSS has been fairly well integrated in. If you go to the governor's webpage, for example, all the news is in RSS feed and that sort of thing is available in RSS feed. It's pulled from our RSS. That's not a problem. But we want to provide an even wider platform for its use. One of the things we'd like to be able to do, for example, is in the case of an emergency, we'd like to be able to aggregate all of the emergency feeds coming from the different departments, which, as I told you, are run by different IT teams, and aggregate them on a single page for the citizens. So that's sort of one of the goals. We may not do that, but we certainly like to promote it to the people who do, for example, civil defense or whoever may actually be the project leader for something like that. Blogs and wikis, we haven't really seen heavy use of that. John and I have been trying to promote it off and on for about a year and a half now. Internally, by internally I mean just the two of us, we use it extremely heavily. In fact, that's how we keep in contact with each other, even though we sit, like one door apart. And that's because there's a lot of times when, we're just, we may see each other at lunch and that's about it. And, or, he may be at a conference, like he's been here this week and while I've been in the office. And so when he comes back to work on Monday morning, we're actually, even before then, because there's a way he can reach it externally, of course. Anytime he wants to, he can go up to both our wiki and our blog and see what I've been up to. And so Monday morning he comes in knowing what I've done. And same thing for me, if I'm out and John's in, I can check the blog at the end of the day and I know what John's done. And so there's not a lot of, I wonder if John did this, or I wonder if I should mention it to him, or vice versa. While he's here, he doesn't have to think, I wonder if Todd did this, I wonder if Todd remembered to do that, and that sort of thing. We can work fairly independently without a lot of phone calls and emails, using just our blogs and our wikis. Again, one of the things I said, we're really looking for a maintainable enterprise system development now. One of the things I've noticed emerging in open source is that they're developed by very small teams by necessity, because that's usually the only people who have to turn to them. The big, well-funded teams don't turn to open source. It's just the way it is. But part of that is that some of the rigors of enterprise software development and maintenance aren't incorporated into the open source projects that emerge from these teams. And so now we want to reintegrate some of those practices back in now that we've kind of got off the quick start. Now we have to make sure that these things last for decades. And that means that we have to institute the kinds of practices that you find in any other large software development effort. Not to say the open source doesn't have it. Certainly, the Apaches and those guys have their act together and they know how to do it. But I'm talking about us specifically, where, we allowed it to grow in a certain way for a reason, a good reason, I think. But now that, it works, we need to kind of bring back into the fold some of the controls that we were perhaps not as rigorous in implementing. And although this may seem out of place in the open source talk, one of the other things we want to do is create a more secure Wi-Fi environment within the state. And the reason I have it on this list is because some of the tools, in fact, so far all the tools we're using are open source tools to provide, the separate network and the routing and all that, firewalls. And so that's going to play a heavy part in our development of our attempt to promote a more secure Wi-Fi network within the state. Again, remembering that we don't have a consolidated IT environment. And so John and I can't go say, you're not safe, you got to do it this way. We have to have a reasonable alternative to provide people if we're going to say we don't think your network is secure enough, we'd like you to do something. So finally, before I open it up, hopefully for some discussion, is open source is in production use within the state. We've got a number of products out there running right now, have been running for several years. The state intranet portal, which was the first large project that we undertook, what we were hired to do in fact, has been running continuously in a production state since September 18th, 2002, John? That sounds about right. So it's been running several years now. We've gone through several upgrade cycles. We tend to do the upgrade cycles on an annual basis. You have to do it when the ledge isn't in session, that sort of thing. We try to build on small successes. We have not attempted a monolithic enterprise project yet, at least one I consider monolithic. As John knows from my endless days when I'm haranguing on one thing or another, is one of Todd's laws of project management is any sufficiently large project is impossible. And so we've been trying not to reach for impossible tasks. We've been trying to go for the smaller, achievable projects that we can build on to create a larger project. And we think we've had some success with that approach. And finally, we have a philosophy of continual research and innovation. So after we found ZOP, we didn't stop. After we discovered that the LAMP tool set fit us, we didn't stop. And certainly, after we master, well, I hope we master, the Java open source toolkits like some of the Jakarta projects and so forth, the Eclipse projects, we're not going to stop there either. And we also don't limit our efforts to simple, I shouldn't say simple, to only program projects. As I said, the Wi-Fi secure piece is something that we're looking to open source tools to provide us a solution, a cheap solution for. As you know, if you want to buy a large authentication server and that sort of thing, it's pretty expensive. So we're looking for a reasonably priced alternative to provide to state departments so that we can say, hey, yeah, your network is not secure, but we're not going to ask you to turn it off. Here's a cheap way to secure it to to a level that we're satisfied with. So with that, please, I can step down there if that seems more comfortable to you guys, so we can talk, or you can just shout out questions and I can answer them up here. What are the acoustics of this room like, by the way? Can you all hear me if I walk down there? Not bad. Okay. Yes. Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So the question was, because it's a decentralized IT infrastructure, do we know of other departments that are doing open source work and what they're doing? And the answer is yes, there are other departments working using open source products. In fact, one of the things we were on the hook for was the past legislative session. There was a request from the House. It's called House resolution, actually concurrent resolution, HCR 83 SB1, that requests a report from the Department of Accounting and General Services, of which our department is part of, to report on the use of open source within the state. And so, as part of the work for that report, I surveyed the departments within the state and asked them what they were doing, if any, with open source. I would say a number of them are using it on various levels. Many simply end users. They're told you buy this Red Hat server because you have to run this application on it to do thing X, and that's what they did. Others are doing more advanced development, where they're actually coding something versus being an end user. And of course, I shouldn't say of course, and we work with other departments. We, not just John and myself, but other people within our department work with other departments, other IT control groups, and we help them if they want to use open source product. For example, one of the things that we did in the last 3 years was to help migrate not only the governor's site, but the entire Hawaii.gov that we control. Again, remembering that HIC controls the 4-fee side. And so we made available to them the platforms that we use, the LAMP plus C. And a number of them have chosen, in fact, to use that to provide content management for their websites. So we've been working with them to develop templates for them to populate and that sort of thing. Yes. Boy, that's a hard one. Wayne could probably answer that better than I can. There is a procedure for centralized IT procurement, but because of the requirements of a number of departments, they're pretty much going to buy what they're going to buy. Yeah, I've read that. That is actually fairly difficult to do, I think, because of the nature of what the requirements are, as I said earlier in my presentation, for certain groups. So, for example, civil defense may require a completely different security system from the Department of Human Services, and they have a completely different security requirements from the Department of Commerce, CCTA. So the economies of scale can come into play. For example, when they purchased Lotus Notes or something, Domino server stuff. That was done on a large-scale purchase that everybody took advantage of. Microsoft Office, is under. There's also the WSCA contract. So, for example, many people, including CompUSA, are part of WSCA, where there's a set price for off-the-shelf kinds of things, and this includes things beyond things like Microsoft Office. I mean, larger things like servers are also on the WSCA contract. So there is some of that. Some of it can't be done, for reasons I don't claim to understand. I'm not an expert in procurement, obviously, but I hear what you're saying. As for communicating with other states, actually, I think we've been doing a lot better job of that recently. And by we, again, I'm speaking now in a kind of a royal we, a lot of us. There's a group that we're not a formal part of, but we helped form, called the GOCC, the Government Open Code Consortium. Our buddy Jim Willis in Rhode Island was actually the spearhead for that. And The GOCC now consists of pretty much every state in the union and a lot of local municipalities, so city and county type of efforts. And we have a email list, we have a website. The website is public, by the way. I think it's gocc.org or something. But you can Google it or Yahoo it. I guess Google doesn't want me to turn into a verb. You can search for it. And in fact, it's really great because I can in fact now pick up the phone or send an email or I am somebody and just say, hey, I need to do this. What do you think? For example, when John and I were starting to relook at Java, one of the first things I did is I went on a mailing list and said, okay, who else is using this Jakarta stuff and what are you doing with it? And I got back some really intriguing responses, including from a fellow in Silver Springs, Colorado. They've got a GIS system built out of Jakarta that just will knock your socks off. It's pretty interesting. And we did it on a much smaller budget than we have. So, it was very gratifying to see the kinds of work that other people are doing. Yes? Okay. Mm-hmm. They don't talk to us. they just send resolutions to us. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I think a lot of that happened a couple of years ago with people like Scott, actually. About 2 years ago, I remember sitting in on was it a House or Senate? I can't remember. But I think it was a Senate conference meeting where it's a Senate hearing, excuse me, where there were